Hello, folks. Welcome to another Monday, another stream.
Yeah, hello, everybody. Good to see you again, so to speak. Good to see you again, too, Ted. I understand you've got something going on next week, and we won't see you next week.
Yeah, so next week I am in Kansas City for the Kansas City Developer Conference, and I'm giving not just one talk, but two talks.
Wow. Awesome.
One talk is on the AssertJ library of test assertions, and it's really interesting. Like I've been using this library since it was called Fest, 15 years ago, maybe even longer, and actually contributed the big decimal special support for big decimal assertions, because at the time I was working for Guidewire and we were doing a lot of stuff with money, and of course we used big decimals because there was no standardized money library. It's really interesting doing, whenever I do a talk, especially a new one like this, I've done pieces of it. I was like, sort of what's new, it's one of those things like this library is actually quite active considering how old it is and how sort of you might think, oh, it's mature and there's nothing else to add. There's just constantly new stuff. And there's also things that have, so were added at somewhere along the line and I didn't know about or I didn't think about. And so doing research for a talk like this, I want to see like, oh, is there another way to do this? And it's like, oh, wow, there's this whole other thing that I didn't know about. So it's fascinating. I don't know if it's amazing, but it's very gratifying that even though, been in this industry and especially working with this library, forget like been in the industry, but like working with this library for so long, and there's still new stuff to learn. And that's been really fun. And I'm like, my talk is an hour and it's like, okay, how do I cram all this stuff into an hour? Because I could talk about this for a while. So, and for the longest time I've been thinking about creating a course. And so this will actually be a good foundation for a course workshop that I'll probably give on the topic.
Nice. And what's your other talk about?
So the other talk is on refactoring, and I call it advanced refactoring in IntelliJ, mainly because it's more than just extract method and extract variable and rename. It's like, so there's what I call sort of the ones that are built in, I call some sort of atomic refactoring. It's like, you push one button and it does one thing and it can do it really well, as we've seen on this stream. But then you have to sometimes use a few of those in combination to achieve a certain thing. Like one refactoring, what I call a refactoring maneuver, is cohere method. It's basically to fix feature envy. So often you have to extract, and sometimes you have to then introduce variable, and then you move it, and then you have to rename it in case it and so there's that multi-step process. So my talk is basically talking about the ones I use a lot that I don't see anybody else talk about. And you look at the documentation for this stuff, and it tells you how to do it, but that's not enough. That's like, okay, great. So I know how to move method. Why would I do it? So hopefully I'll be answering the question of why do you want to do that? Why do you want to move instance methods? And then how do you get it set up to do that? And again, it's one of those, like especially for this stuff, I spend a lot of time just playing, just experimenting. And that's going to be sort of part of the message there, is like, you have to set aside that time to experiment and practice and play in order to learn about stuff that you haven't really explored.
Yeah, and particularly, I mean, you're so right that if all you know about refactoring is the built-in sort of what you're calling atomic refactorings, hey, Suiji, and you're just renaming and extracting variable and inlining variable, that's good. I mean, that's a good start. But I think the true power of refactoring is when you do more than the micro stuff.
Yes.
When you do more than just what you can see in a single file.
Yeah.
And we are starting to restructure your code. And I tend to call that evolutionary design.
Yeah.
It's not all there is to evolutionary design, but it's a big part of it.
Yeah.
And without that, I don't think you're really getting the real benefits of refactoring, which is decreasing your cost of maintenance over time.
Yeah.
You might be making a file a little bit easier to understand, which is great, but your big picture design has to change over time too.
Yep. Yeah, and that's where people always say, like, what should I do? And so it's like, you want to do this in small constrained projects, katas, and practice these kinds of things, so you can start to get a feel for that. But then you need to start applying it, and it goes to sort of what Jeepaw calls the much smaller steps, right? Really breaking down, like, oh, how do I evolve this design to, like, I'm actually working so on my non-pairing stream over the weekend and last week, I've been working on my ensembler tool, which is used for managing the learning ensembles I lead. And I'm adding a feature, and it's one of those where it's like, oh, now I got to go refactor this other thing. And then it's like, oh no, now I have to go refactor this other thing. And it's very easy to get caught in this. I always think of this image of, like, you've taken apart a machine and all the pieces are strewn across the floor, and you've run out of time.
Yeah.
And now nothing works.
Yeah. And I've been there, done that, and it's painful.
We probably all have. Yeah.
Yeah. You absolutely need to, be able to do your refactoring in a way that leaves the system working at every step of the way.
Yeah.
If you can't, so many people say, "Oh, I refactored this," or "I'm going to refactor this," and what they really mean is, "I'm going to rewrite it."
Right.
And they're going to take it apart, and they're going to make a whole bunch of stuff, and then maybe they'll put it back together, or maybe they won't. But either way, it's extremely risky, and also, your merges are painful in that environment.
Right.
If you can work in really small steps and you're doing continuous integration, which is a whole nother topic, then you can merge those changes as you go. You can integrate those changes as you go and really decrease the burden on both yourself and the rest of the team. Yeah.
And as Sweegie mentions, Kevlin Henny, I whenever I teach my Make Your Code More Testable, which is basically refactoring to testable code, I always say, like, I bring out the refactoring book. Like, I show an image of the book. It's like, how many of you actually read this? And so few people have. And so what you said is true, is there's this very surface level understanding of what refactoring is. Even if they know, oh, I know it's not rewriting, it's just, extract method and rename. And like you said, it's like, that's table stakes. You got to do that. But it's this series of changes, and then it's keeping them small enough that you can say, if I had to stop here, or if I had to merge, it all still works. It does mean, though, that eventually you do, like right now, the code is there's areas where it's like, oh, this is just such a mess. Where it's like, oh, it's one of those, for me, sort of the true meaning of tech dev. Like, I did the best I could of everything I knew, but now I'm doing it, and I'm changing some things. Like, oh, this is just awful. I mean, and I actually remember saying this was awful at the time, but I didn't know of a better way. And now I finally see a better way. It's like, why didn't I do this before? It's like, well, we don't know. And that's the evolutionary design aspect, is every time you change it, it's now sort of a new context, and you have to say, okay, what's the best way for the code to fit that new context? And it's like, oh, instead of this one big giant thing, I can have two smaller things. And so I've got, in a sense, some dead code. It's not, I haven't quite killed it yet. But then, once it's dead, then the code will be a lot nicer. But right now it's been working along the way, and I could have shipped it if I wanted to, but I didn't.
Yeah. No, I think working in small steps is really a superpower. Yeah. Like, if you can implement your features in small steps, if you can refactor in small steps, if you can keep the code working at every step of the way, because we've all been there where we've made something and now the code doesn't work, and we don't know why. Yeah. And that's so painful. If you just work in small steps, I say if you work in small steps, which takes work, it takes practice. But if you work in small steps, you make your life so much easier, because for me, debugging is the death of productivity. Yeah. If I have to stop and debug and figure out why things aren't working, then I'm off in the weeds. Yeah. And if I'm working in small steps, I can just undo.
Exactly. And that's the key, right? It's like you're taking these small steps, and it fits very well with sort of the sunk cost fallacy, right? And loss aversion, all these things where it's like, oh, I've written all this code. I always feel like debugging to get it to work is sort of like hammering, this piece that just doesn't fit. But if you hammer it enough, eventually it'll fit good enough, versus just saying, oh, let me just toss it out and try again. And that mentality it's a very hard switch. But what I love about the smaller steps is the smaller steps they are, the less you have invested. It's like, I just wrote a line of code. It doesn't work. Let me delete it. Or I wrote, 5 lines of code. It's 5 lines of code. Delete it and do it again. And that's much easier.
The thing that I find is that I actually need to throw away and revert when I'm taking too big of a step.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Because I do a bunch of stuff and it doesn't work. And I'm like, I don't know why this doesn't work. And I'll bet you if I do it again in a smaller step, it will just work.
Right.
And if it doesn't, it'll be easy to figure out.
Yeah.
Endofunctor in the comments says, what would you take as a hint to know when something is too complex and needs to be split up? What's your heuristics? What's your rules of thumb for that?
It's when I feel like I don't know what to do next. I feel like I'm. So it's certainly tests. So Endofunctor 0 mentions sort of tests. Tests are definitely like, wow, this is really hard to sort of isolate the thing I want to test. That's one kind of complexity. But the other kind of complexity is like, I have no idea what to do. I have no idea where to start. And that means like, or I've done something and I'm like, wait, there's this sort of distant side effect. Or how did I get this? And it's these sort of this either uneasy feeling or just these bumps, or like in the code that in my ensembler tool, it's like some stuff is represented as a state enum and some isn't. And so there's this state of it's pending complete, but that's not enough official state. It's just a calculated based on something else. It's like, oh, that's horrible. And so it's like, it looks like a state, but it's not a state. And so when I encounter those things, I used to give a talk on mindfulness. It's like noticing that and saying, and basically taking that step back and saying, there's something not quite right. And it's not, and I don't know if it's a complexity, but it's an inconsistency, which I think is just as bad.
Yeah, I definitely agree that you just hone your design sense over time through experience. And I think, my definition of good design is code that's easy to change.
Yeah.
And of course, that depends a lot. We've talked about this before. That depends a lot on who's making the change and what the change is.
Right.
And just over time, as you experience things being easy and difficult to change, you will sort of, kind of like you were talking about last week, you will get all of these examples in your head and your brain will start to work out, what is good design.
Yeah.
I wish that there was a way to convey, a set of rules for good design, but I don't think that's actually true. I think it's very much a matter of judgment and taste and experience. I will say, though, for the specific question of how do you know when something is too complex and needs to be split up, the main heuristic I'll use is purely lines of code. If I have a function or a method with more than 5 to 10 lines of code, actually more than 5 lines of code, I'm looking at that function and saying, this might be too long. And if I have a class that's more than a couple of screens of code, then I'm looking at the same thing.
Yeah.
But I'm also looking at my tests. Can I use the same basic setup for everything that I'm doing here? I'm looking at responsibilities. Is all the things that this class is doing, are they really related to each other?
Right.
I'm looking at cohesion. If I split this apart, am I going to be adding more complexity in terms of coordinating these two things?
Right.
So it's not always just length or anything else.
Right. Yeah. I've given talks on primitive obsession, and that's one of my favorite ways of looking at a class. It's like, is it just managing too much state? Right? In an OO class, there's going to be a bunch of state, and of course you want some state, but you don't want 30 pieces of state. It's unlikely that 30 pieces of state are cohesive. And so you have to look at those, and one of the nice things with the tools is it's very easy to say how much code is accessing this state versus this other piece of state, and then does it make sense to separate them? And looking at it from a primitive obsession lens, it's a great way to look at that.
Of course, there's also the same problem in reverse. You've probably noticed this in our work together. I don't like it when there's too many files, just as I don't like it when there's too many lines of code. So a force in the other direction is if I see a class and all it's doing, if it doesn't have any real work of its own, if it's just coordinating between other things and it's very repetitive in the way it does that coordination, then I'm also saying, well, wait, are we over engineering? And the most common way I see this is sort of a over dedication to a layered architecture.
Mm-hmm.
Like we must have these layers,
Yeah.
and so this class isn't going to do anything, but it's going to mediate from this layer to this layer, and then the next one isn't going to do anything, but it's going to mediate from this layer to this layer, and so on down the line. And so when I see that sort of thing, or just really classes that don't have any there,
Mm-hmm.
I'm asking myself, well, can I merge these back together? So I think that's the opposing force, because of course too many files is just as bad as not enough.
Yeah, I guess it's and so so you mentioned sort of experience and judgment before, and of course experience and judgment is based on our experience, right? We build the judgment based on our experience. And my experience of working on very large and medium-sized code bases and a bunch of different companies is it's rare that in the code bases I've seen that I see a lot of sort of middlemen that, the middleman that doesn't do anything. I know what happens. There's a refactoring for it, right? Remove middleman and right there in IntelliJ. I just haven't encountered a lot. What I encounter so much more is the big classes that do everything. And so that's probably why I tend to be focused more on dividing things than pulling things together based on 99 times out of 100, the problem I see is I can't test this because this thing is too big.
I would say that that's the majority of my experience, but it may be a difference in the types of people who hire us.
Yeah.
Because I do occasionally get people who hire me where they, the typical developer, I would say, is one who does not pay enough attention to design. But there is also a class of developer who pays too much attention to design.
Yes, the ideal perfect design that is so abstract that you can't make heads or tails of anything.
Yeah. And that's when you start to see this sort of very consistent approach, but hard to understand and hard to follow because there's not enough there.
Yeah.
And I have to say, I'm more sympathetic to that kind of design than I am to the big ball of mud approach, because sometimes it does make sense to just say, look, we have a controller for every endpoint, and some endpoints are just going to turn around and call another thing, and that's okay.
Yeah.
So
I'm much more happy to see that, because actually I do that in some cases where it's just for consistency. Okay, this is sort of an empty thing, but it generally has this particular role that makes it easy for people to follow. And then as you get more experience, you can say, you know what, we can use our judgment to say, actually now this no longer makes sense. And to end Functor's question, IntelliJ has a specific refactoring called remove middleman, which you can basically do with an inline in some ways, but often if there's an object where it's getting something and then turning around and just delegating to something else, then that's just something you could just refactor away. And the automated refactor may or may not work.
Yeah. Another thing that I think goes along with this is because we all do have different experiences. This is where, well, two things, both collective ownership in a team of the code where people are working together using pairing or ensembling or teaming to get those difference of perspectives, but also good working agreements in the team so that you know how to talk about design with each other. And that takes time and I think leadership. We talked in a previous episode about the importance of strong, capable leadership. And I don't necessarily mean people with a manager title, but people who are, I think programmers are particularly prone to discounting the value of social skills. But there is a place for understanding how to create good collaborative communication
Mm-hmm.
on a team.
Yeah.
And we need those skills on a team in order to sort of address the kind of thing that Suiji's saying, they're making decisions based on their judgment. How do you communicate that?
Yeah.
How do you make your case? Well, if everybody's treating communication as a battle to be won or
Mm-hmm.
lost, you're going to have a lot more difficulty with that, as opposed to people who take a more improv style yes and approach, where they're trying to build up your ideas rather than tear them down.
Yeah. And the other thing I find, and this goes to something that GPaw has said, as well as just the fundamentals of learning, is I can talk all day, but it's much more effective to say, let's do it and see what it looks like. And because we think in our heads are much more fuzzy and ambiguous than we think they are. Then we think we hold stuff in our head and we think it's very concrete. But then we sort of turn it into code on a screen and we say, oh, that's what you had in mind. Oh, I see what you're saying. I thought, right. And so it's a lot of times, I don't know about a lot of times, but often enough, it's like, oh yeah, I totally agree with that. and we're like, why were we arguing about this for half an hour? And so that's, and it's so easy to fall into the discussion. And I do this all the time. And I'm like, how about we just try it out and see? Yeah.
I'm reminded of Kent Beck's 10-minute rule, which is that if you can't agree on a direction for 10 minutes, just pick one and do it. Or go off and both do a site.
Do both. And
see.
Yeah, because and again, because and this again is like how we learn. We build from patterns. We also are so much better at at comparing things and saying, I always think of when you go for glasses, they say, is this better A or B? Is this better A or B? And it's the same thing with anything. It's like if I say, is this good? And I show you one thing, it's like, okay, it's good. But if you say, is this better or is this better? Then you can say, this is better. And then you can say why.
And it's so true. I mean, I see, particularly in programming, but also when it comes to making prioritization decisions, if you're asked, is this a Sev 1, a Sev 2, a Sev 3, that's really hard.
Yeah.
But if you say, which of these should we do first? Should we do this or this first? Should we do this or this first? It's become so much easier.
Yeah.
We wrap ourselves up in knots, arguing the abstract, and particularly people that wrap themselves up in knots saying, well, what about this? What about this? It's such a classic delaying tactic, right? I don't want to do this, so I'm going to come up with every possible objection.
Right.
As opposed to just, sometimes you just have to move forward.
Yeah, and sometimes it's basically the just make a decision. At worst, it's the wrong one, but at least you're moving, and that turns out to be. And a lot of times, it's like we blow this up in the discussion, and it's like it turns out like it's just not that important, and so we spend so much time arguing about it instead of just saying. And I don't know, later in my career, I would just say, all right. Because I used to basically just argue because I felt my way was righter or better. And I'm like, that's fine. Let's do that. And I'm like, I'm not, it's the hill I want to die on. And it's like, I don't want to die on those hills anymore.
Yeah. Charlie Pancake says, let's assume we're going to make the wrong choice. So pick the one that's easiest to undo. This comes back to Kent Beck's reversibility.
Yeah, reversibility. Yeah.
Let's just focus on reversibility. That way, we don't have to agonize about these choices.
Right.
We'll make the one that appears right. And then reversibility doesn't mean undo and lose all that work. It means being able to make the change needed to make it right, because we won't know what the right answer is right away. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's that willingness to, and this goes back to some of the stuff you're talking about before, like this idea, so psychological safety is the underpinning for all this. It's the willingness to make a mistake that, we're very protective of our egos, and I know I've suffered from that through large parts of my career, and being willing to make mistakes, as long as are they reversible? Are they huge ones? Okay, then maybe we need to be more careful. But a lot of times it's just like, we tried that and it didn't work.
That's okay.
And that's okay. And maybe we deleted 100 lines of code. But, like it's said all the time, it's like typing is not the bottleneck. It wasn't the typing of that code that took the time. It was the learning. And now we've learned something. Now we know more. And now we can make a more informed decision of what to do next.
Yeah. Well, speaking of being concrete and just doing stuff, let's do some coding.
Sure. I wanted to say, so John CV mentioned you name a method applesauce instead of agonizing over the perfect name. So this actually happened last week in our ensemble. We were discussing probably for too long the name of a method. And we just basically gave it what Arla Bell, she calls an honest name. It was this really long name. We couldn't think of anything better, and it'll stand out in the future. It wasn't quite applesauce because we knew what it did, but it's like, and that's the other thing is like, sometimes you just have to walk away and let it sit. And like you say, in the shower, you'll come up with a better idea, or you won't, and you move on. And it's not the end of the world that you have a method that's not perfectly named, as much as that hurts me.
If you're always improving your code, this is one of my favorite tricks in software development. If you're working in small steps and always making little improvements as you go, then whichever code you touch most often is going to be the code that gets the most improvements. And so you don't have to worry about it. Either you're going to come back to it in the future, in which case you'll have another idea, or you won't, and it won't matter because you'll never see it again. Right?
Yeah.
But you don't have to worry about making your code perfect, because the code that matters, the code you touch all the time, it will get better as long as you have a practice, a habit of making improvements when you see them.
Yes. And that goes back to the noticing thing and saying, and also weighing like, is this something that we can fix now? Or is this something that let's take a note of maybe? But even there, it's like, do we want to put a to-do in? No, if we, like you said, it's like if we encounter it again, then we'll fix it. The danger is if you just never fix it and you're constantly coming across it, then that's something you have to be aware of and say, okay, we've come across this the third time. Let's put everything aside and fix this thing. Well,
and again, taking small steps.
Yeah.
If you can make little fixes.
Yeah.
It's sort of like housework. If you save up doing the dishes to be a once a month type of affair, you're going to need a nuclear bomb to clean that kitchen. But if you do it as you go, then not only is your kitchen much more pleasant to be in because it's always clean, but it's not such a big effort. If you're in a rush and you leave a plate on the counter, then next time you come in, you put 2 plates away instead of 1. That's okay. Well, speaking of getting to the code, over the break, I had an assignment which was to figure out why the type checking didn't work.
Yes.
And I have since figured that out. Now, if we do a build and do a type check, God, I hope this works. Yes, it will work. Let me do a clean type check on that just to make sure it's actually doing it.
Yay!
And I still, to this day, don't know exactly why. But I know what I did to fix it. I just don't know why it didn't work before. And I've integrated the code, and so we're ready to go on to the next thing. But for those who are interested, Suiji, I think it was Suiji, sent in a patch a little while ago to make IntelliJ work. And that patch was to add a tsconfig to our front-end project. And all that does is extend the master tsconfig, which is at the top level.
Oh, you can do that. That's interesting.
Yeah. And in fact, one of the things I'd like to do is, because I've got all of our config in build config, I kind of want to move that into build config. Problem is it's JSON, not code. So how do I get it to incorporate with the other path stuff I've got? Anyway, I haven't done that yet. It turns out that if you run TypeScript in the front end directory, it works. If you run it at the top level, it doesn't. And the difference is which tsconfig it was using. So I've modified the build, specifically the type check, to say, run it on the front end tsconfig. And now it works.
Okay.
I don't know why.
All right.
but I assume it has to do with. At first, I thought it was something related to it doesn't know what the correct root directory is, and we do have that specified. So there may be. It's probably not an issue with TypeScript, but it seems to only find the node modules if it's in the same location as the TS config.
Huh.
And it could be one of those things where everybody puts
Right.
TS config at the top level,
Right.
so it's a bug.
Right.
Or it could be some configuration issue I haven't figured out yet. But I did spend far too much time reading documentation about TypeScript configuration options.
Well, I'm glad you got it to work, though, even if you don't 100% understand why.
Yeah, well, and that always makes me really nervous.
Yeah,
because
then if it breaks again.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Oh well. But it's sort of in the spirit of coming back to it, I have found that after working with a tool chain for a couple of years, I understand it a lot better than I did in the beginning.
Right.
And I can't really point to any point in that time where it magically came together. It just sort of gradually becomes more clear.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like building a graph. You're constantly adding nodes to it, and at some point it reaches some critical mass where now it sort of like condenses and like, oh, now I understand.
Yeah. So when we left off, we had finished making our HttpClient wrapper, and we had next on our list to make it nullable. But I actually am wondering if it might be nice to do a little bit of top-down design on this rather than part of what's happening here is I've done nullables enough that I just know what we are going to need.
Right.
And so I tend to jump to that because having something that's sort of half built and then going and setting aside and coming to the next thing is hard for me. I hate having stuff sort of hanging out there, niggling my brain saying, I'm not done yet. I'm not done yet. But I wonder if we should start instead either at the real top level of our React application class or the front-end wrapper for the back-end client and or the back-end service. And then that will lead us to needing to make the HTTP client nullable really quickly.
I like that direction. I'm very much, top down, and it might be more compelling for folks.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah,
I'm inclined to start here rather than here.
Yeah,
because this is a whole different type of coding, and I think we're going to run into all sorts of problems as we get into it. And that will be distracting if we're bouncing back between those sorts of problems and doing the infrastructure stuff.
Yep.
But if we start with the back-end client, that will allow us to sort of specify. We'll have to figure out what our back-end interface is going to be. We can start to specify that all out.
Right.
And then fairly quickly, we'll need to make the HTTP client nullable.
Yep. That sounds like a plan.
Okay. Just saw EndoFunctors comment. Something my family started doing, which has actually been amazing, is we just set aside 10 minutes every day for cleaning. That's not like the kind of cleaning we have to do anyway, like the cleaning the kitchen. Doing 10 minutes of tidying a day is actually a huge amount. And within about a week or two of doing this, we start running out of stuff to do. So there's James Shore's house cleaning tips, which is of course why you all came here. Literally set a timer for 10 minutes. Yeah. And then stop after 10 minutes. That's another thing.
That's the key. Yes.
And then it's no big deal. Like if it's only 10 minutes, you can find 10 minutes a day.
I mean, even 5 minutes. Yeah. Like if you feel like, oh my God, I can't do 10 minutes, you can do 5 minutes.
Yeah. Exactly.
And it's a great trick. And I use that when I find myself procrastinating. It's like, I am going to spend 5 minutes to do something having to do with this thing, and then I will stop. And often you're like just it feels like you're punching yourself for the first minute or so, and then it's like, all right, I'm going to just do it because otherwise I'm bored. And you do it, and it's like, oh, that wasn't so bad.
Yeah. There's all these little tricks for our procrastinating brains. Yeah. One thing I learned about procrastination, I don't remember where I read this, but I think it was on Twitter, but it made a lot of sense to me. Is that procrastination doesn't happen because we're lazy. Procrastination happens because we have stress. and we protect our brain. Our brains are protecting us from that stress by not thinking about it.
Yeah.
So if you just
good.
if you get started, then that helps a lot. The other thing that helps is to write down what the thing is that you're procrastinating about. Even if you don't do it now, you can write it down and make it visible, and that helps quite a bit as well.
Yeah. So Timothy Pitchell, who has a site called Procrastination, is a researcher. Basically has a bunch of stuff around this, and it's basically an emotional. It's not a time issue. It's not a. It's what are you avoiding? What is the fear? What is the thing you're afraid of? What is it that you think if you don't know how to do? And sometimes you don't know how to do, but you might be able to take that first small, tiny step, and then, if nothing else, well, you've taken a tiny step. But you may find it's like you thought it was this huge wall. You took a tiny step, and actually, it was just a brick, and you stepped over it.
Well, speaking of tiny steps,
yes. What's our tiny step?
What's our tiny step? So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to put our current thing here. We're going to come to this really quickly, so I'll bet you'll be back to it in a moment. And so in our front end code, we've got an infrastructure package which has our HTTP client in it and our HTTP client tests. And as a reminder for everybody who's not seen this before, HTTP client is a wrapper for fetch, has the ability to do a request. And it's just got a slightly nicer API than fetch does. Fetch is pretty good, but this is simpler for our needs specifically. So we're going to make a backend client. I assume you're okay with me just diving into this, Ted.
Go for it.
So we'll have a backend client.test.ts. I've been calling this backend client in my head for a while. Are you okay with that?
Backend client.
Yeah, so this is the code on the front end that's going to be responsible for abstracting the communication with the backend. And backend definitely feels way too vague.
That's where I was getting caught up. It's like, is there something better? But I don't have a better idea, so we can call it applesauce client.
Trivially in the future.
Right.
I think what we'll probably end up doing in the future is actually having multiple interfaces to the backend.
Mm-hmm.
And then we can say, well, here's the weather client or something else.
Right. Yeah. I agree. Like for now, it's generic, but it's also, we don't have any more information. At least I don't have any more information to suggest anything more specific.
We call it OpenAI client, but I actually don't think we're going to be talking directly to OpenAI.
Yeah, no.
Back end,
yeah.
Or from the front end. Okay, so here's our WTF, wholesome test framework. And we'll just make sure that we can run.
Yeah, we weren't asking about the real weather. This was our fictional weather for our story. Yeah, you don't want to.
Oh yeah, for the game.
You don't want to ask OpenAI to tell you the weather.
Okay, let me get the.
It will just lie to you. Oh.
Okay, there we go.
Oh, okay.
There is something weird where the first couple of times it runs, it doesn't seem to catch. I've probably left that in a wait somewhere because I'm not sure why it's not catching this. The dependency analysis code I wrote as a just sort of as a spike. Can I actually do dependency analysis by doing regexes on files? Turns out the answer is yes. Yes, you can.
Yes, you can.
But I didn't write it with any tests. And so to this day, that 200 lines of code or whatever it is, 112 lines of code, I really want to redo it test-driven so that I know that it really works. Because it's got a lot of concurrency associated with it because it's loading files. And it's got caching, a lot of caching. So I just don't trust it to really work.
Oh, it's one of the hard problems in computer science. So yeah.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. Like, you made a decision to do that, right? You made a decision. I'm going to do this, and I'm going to not write tests for it, and going to sort of spike it, and it works. And you leave it until at some point you decide, I think there might be something wrong, and then you can go back and do it. But like I did that for my ensemble. I wrote a whole invite mechanism to invite people. I don't use it that often, and so it writes straight to the database and selects directly from the database, and there's no tests for it. And it's like it worked, and it was when I start using it more and I probably need functionality, I'll go back and rewrite it. But I just wanted to point that out, because like you and I are like, TDDers, but like we don't always do that.
Yeah, exactly. And when I make this sort of decision, the thing that's in the back of my mind is, because it is a decision, it didn't happen accidentally. It's not because I'm a bad person.
Yeah.
I chose not to do this.
Right.
And when I make these decisions, partly I know that I am very capable of refactoring code. And partly I know that the design is good enough that I can just ignore this piece. And it's going to be on its own, and it either works or it doesn't. And then when I need to come back to it, if I ever come back to it, because God, it's been years at this point, I know that it's bad, and at that point, that's when I'll make changes. But until then, I'm just going to keep on using it the way it is. So we've got our backend client here. I guess what we need to do here is, typically when I'm doing an infrastructure wrapper for HTTP, I will have it in two parts. I'll say it sends requests and it parses response. And so if we're going to send request, I think what we need is an HTTP client. And right away, this is where we need our create null HTTP client.
Right.
But let's go ahead and build out this test a little bit further.
Yeah, because it'll help us, if nothing else, figure out what we need from the null. And then, yeah.
We'll want a backend client. Let me do this one piece at a time. So we don't have an HTTP client yet.
Oh, I thought it imported it. Okay.
Right?
I thought it imported it for us, but maybe I didn't.
No, we didn't. We have to press the button.
Okay.
So that's not going to work because we don't have a create null.
Right.
I should be able to add a create null to HTTP client. I'm going to move that to the top. Then we'll need a backend client that will presumably take that HTTP client. This one, I don't know if it's going to do the good job. It sort of did.
That wasn't too bad.
Okay. Let's move this to backendclient.ts. I want to rename that to be yes. Oh.
There's probably some naming convention setting somewhere, but yeah, that's annoying.
Yeah, probably. All right. Well, that's obviously. Is it backend client or back_end client?
I say underscore because that's what we call the module. So if we're going to say front end is 2 words and back end is 2 words.
Yep, you're right. It's saying you can't find the module. This may be an issue with the dependency analyzer. Yeah, doesn't like new files. Okay, so we've got our backend client now. It doesn't take the HTTP client in the constructor. Oh no, it does. Why is it complaining here?
Yeah.
Argument of
it
type.
Thinks HTTP client is void? Oh, because the create null returns nothing?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why. Yeah.
So that's going to fail. So we'll return a new HTTP client. There we go. So now we have a backend client. We're going to want to do something to that backend client.
Yes.
And so if we go back to our mockup, which I don't think we have a mockup.
Well, we have the very high, very cheap mockup that you
actually we do have a mockup. I think.
We created. You created a really simple file.
Yeah. Let me see. Yeah, so we're going to just say something to the front end. That's all we're doing right now. We're sending something out and getting a response back. So here for folks. So what we're going to do is we're going to say send message.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Send message.
I don't love send message because it's got such computer science implications.
Yes. I mean, we could just say say or tell or something like that.
Yeah, let's just. I like say.
Yeah.
Say my message. That's not going to work.
Right, because the method doesn't
exist.
Yeah.
But we can add that. Yeah. And we're going to want this to return a string, I think. So I'm going to, because that's going to return the response.
Ah, okay.
And then now what we need to do is we need to assert that we've sent the correct message to the server. So to do that, I'm going to make a HTTP requests and do an HttpClient.track requests.
Yep.
That's not going to exist.
Right, we didn't add tracking yet.
We haven't done any of that.
Yep.
And now we should be able to say assert.deep equal HTTP requests data equal to an array of requests. Now it organized away my assert.
Hate when that happens.
And so what do we want this to do? Now we're talking about the actual path, method, and so forth.
Right, so whatever our path is, what do we want our path?
This is all very temporary. We're going to be we're not going to be talking directly to the back end. The say method is going to go away entirely. So I think we could just say say.
Yeah.
And the method I think we're going to want is post, right?
Yes, we definitely want post.
Do we care about the headers?
Do we care about the headers in this case? Are we sending JSON?
Yeah, let's send JSON.
Yeah, so then we're going to do that.
And the body is going to be what?
I think for now it's just
message.
Right, it doesn't like data because data doesn't exist yet.
It doesn't like data because HTTP request doesn't exist. So here, we can go into here and just have this return. Or return. Same deal. Okay, I think that's the beginnings of our backend test. I think that's good enough for now.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to turn this one off. But I think I'd like to check it in and say that we started to implement
Backend client say.
first backend client test. I think at this point we should go way back into HttpClient and get this to work.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So what do we need? We need create null to work. We
Right.
need track request to
Track
work.
requests. Yep.
So let's set all this aside. Oh, and I'm So I think the first thing I'd like to do is get create null not actually talking to the backend.
Mm-hmm.
So let's make this, let's put this whole thing in a describe block saying that we, normal operation.
Okay.
I'm going to take the it out of here just so we don't end up. One of the flaws of WTF is the way it knows where a test is it has to use the function provided to it. So if I use the it that's defined here
Mm-hmm.
rather than the it that's defined here, it will think that it's part of this test suite rather than this test suite.
Oh.
And that's actually, I think, the biggest flaw of this because it requires you to remember this. And otherwise, it doesn't know where it's at. And so your test output will be kind of funny. So that's normal operation. And then let's say that we've also got a nulled.
Nulled. Yep.
If we just go through here, say it doesn't. Take HTTP requests. I think it's basically the same thing. So we're going to do a normal request async,
Mm-hmm.
and we're going to assert that the response was, oh, you agree with that?
So we're saying that if we're using the null instance and we try to make a request, it's not going to hit our spy server. Yep.
That's right.
Right.
And of
And of
course,
course, it still does because we haven't changed anything.
so we need to make a HTTP client. We need to pass that in to our request async helper. Request async helper, for everybody who wasn't listening, is just turning around and calling request async.
Mm-hmm.
But this allows us to not worry about a lot of the parameters. So I'll default the client to being a new HTTP client.
Right.
Say that it's optional.
Oh, because it's HTTP client, not client. Yep.
Okay.
Right.
Still isn't working. But now, because we don't expect any particular method headers or body, we can just do this.
Ah, right.
That's the what I love about the optional parameters.
Yeah.
Okay. Still isn't working because we're just returning a normal HTTP client.
Mm-hmm.
So now we need to pass in. This is where we need to pass in the fetch object. I'm gonna
Right.
skip this for a moment. So we need to stub this out when we're in nulled mode,
Mm-hmm.
and not stub it out when we're not in nulled mode.
Right.
And to begin with, I actually want to do a couple of things. First, I want to make a static create.
Right. That one will use the real fetch.
Yeah. That way we can make our constructor.
Right. No, it takes the fetch, right?
We'll do that in a minute.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I'm going to add type checking onto this for build.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because you just made the constructor private, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So down here, we need to say HttpClient.create instead of create null, or instead of new. And
right, the data doesn't know about, that's fine.
Right. Yeah, this I'm just going to briefly.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to put an empty data there? Or?
If you do any, that's basically turning off the type checking for those things. It's usually bad form. There's a few cases where you genuinely have any type, but it's sort of the, shut up, stop bothering me TypeScript indicator. Which I really like.
Yeah, no, it's nice. I mean, that's the benefit of sort of gradual typing is like, all right, let's actually pretend that it's nothing, and later on constrain it.
The trick is remembering to take those back out.
Yes, and I believe there's options to basically mark any's as warnings as well. So
Tuple is a much nicer alternative to JetBrains Code with Me. We use that a lot in our last stream, 404, and it didn't work very well.
Well, we didn't use Code with Me. So the problem with Code with Me,
we used Code Together.
Yeah, we used Code Together, which has its own issues. Code with Me, you end up getting a light client, which is not what you want. So Tuple is basically screen sharing. So we're actually looking at James's screen.
Yeah,
and it does a really good job.
It's very much screen sharing in that whatever's on my screen, if I drag it into the window, then there it is. It's just there, which has its pluses and minuses, but just has been a lot more reliable.
Yeah.
And whatever they're doing to get latency down is very good.
Yeah.
So the only real problem I found with it is that their compression algorithm really crushes the contrast.
Yes.
Like this background looks a lot darker to me than it does to Ted and the rest of you.
No, Wheatlow, you heard no such thing. The only reason we're in dark mode is because of the contrast problem.
Yeah.
Which I need to refile an issue on that. I mean, by myself.
By the way, I did notice it's not just that the white background looks
Washed
gray.
out, yeah.
The dark background doesn't look as dark as it really is.
Yeah. There's something the way it's.
Yeah, it's really just.
It's
bringing
weird.
down the contrast substantially.
Yeah, I don't understand why it does that. What?
Okay, so now we have it doing this. So now what I want to do is I want to pass in fetch. Why doesn't it like that? Oh, just because
we haven't made the constructor. Yeah.
Yeah. So fetch is going to be.
It's like fetch is whatever it is. Whatever it is.
The cool thing about this is I could say it's a function, but saying type of fetch, if I've done this right, which I don't know that I have, this actually knows the full type of the fetch global and
right.
and like says, well, okay, it's a function that takes these parameters and et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, what does it tell me? I think we want this to be a private read-only fetch. We'll just do it that way.
So line 8 is going to be a problem because it doesn't pass in anything. So right here.
Right. Sorry, I was just looking at the comment. I think Wheatlow might be correct.
Oh, the type of?
No, so type of fetch gives us a type, but that's what this expression is. This expression is a type. So I believe that's correct. And Suiji makes a good point. Does the type of thing fall apart when embedded sub only implements a tiny portion of the real thing? Yes, this is different. Normally what you're doing is passing in an object. Here we're passing in a function. So it's just kind of weird. Let's try it anyway. I think we're going to have to do a proper class because we're going to want to provide some parameters to it. But we can get started this way. So stub fetch. Which I guess I have to put somewhere else because it doesn't function inside of a class.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's it.
But it's not of the type that it's expecting.
Yeah, it wants it to return a promise of response, of type response.
That makes sense.
So let's make it async. Return a type of promise response. Oh, and it's complaining because we're not actually
doing it. Yeah.
So we'll return a promise resolve. So here's the issue: is we don't really want to return a response here. A full-blown response could be too much work for us.
Yeah, I don't know what it requires.
Let's sneak up on this in gradual typing. Let's just say that we don't care what it is. Okay. So if you're keeping notes of any's that we need to squash, add that one to the list.
I assume we can find those with a search, so I'm not keeping track.
Eventually, we will have any's in our code base that are real. So We do have ESLint set up, Wheatlow. I don't know what you mean by proper ESLint. But I don't have it configured to stop us from using any because there have been enough there's enough cases where we actually want it that it's not configured. Okay, so now that we've got this working, I think if we turn on the doesn't make HTTP request, this should work now because we have a stub fetch that doesn't do anything.
Right. That's interesting.
Failed to parse URL from blah, blah, blah. Right. So there's our response right there. So we do need to implement enough of the response API for this code to work.
Mm-hmm. I'm concerned, though, the URL that's trying to parse is missing a slash.
Where do you see that?
So right here between the port, there's no slash.
Oh, that's interesting.
And I remember we had fixed that at some point.
It's probably our irrelevant. Our default is probably wrong. There.
Ah, okay.
So
it was the default. Oh, it was the default. Before. That's why. Yeah. Okay. We hadn't used the default before. Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do we want to take a break?
Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah.
I kind of lost track of time.
Yep. All right. So we'll take a break, and when we come back, we'll get more stuff working. Stay tuned.
Okay. So we were just trying to get the Nullable implementation of HttpClient working. And I don't remember what change I made right before the break.
So we just fixed the slash, but we still have the problem the real problem that was there.
Yeah, so it's saying fetch failed now. When I didn't have the slash, we got a different error message.
Right, because it couldn't parse it because it wasn't a valid port, basically.
Yeah, but now...
But if we correct it?
Oh, so it looks like what's happening is it's probably it's calling the real fetch, I think.
Because
we're getting a fetch failed on that.
It must be, because otherwise nobody would be parsing it.
Yeah, exactly. So how is that working? So we're in...
Oh, because that test doesn't... No, that test does do a create null.
Yeah.
Is that the one that's failing? Doesn't make HTTP requests.
Yeah, I'm clicking the stack trace. It's definitely the one that's failing.
Well,
let's see put some debugging in here. See if this is what's running. And I think over here, I'm going to make it only run this test so that we don't get too much output. So we are calling create null.
Okay.
And let's see if and do we have create null passing in the stubbed fetch? Oh, you know what we don't
we never actually replaced the fetch.
Yeah, we never said this.fetch. Sure. Now it's failing, but for a much better reason.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, good. I'll put this back down here. So we don't need that anymore. Classic example of how doing small steps makes debugging easy.
Yes. and watching for failures that are the right failures and not the wrong failures.
Exactly.
Because we had a couple of wrong failures. Unexpected failures.
Okay, so we're calling fetch, we're getting fetch response, and then we need that fetch response. What's that card you just said?
That's from my game, the test results, and so unexpected is what we were getting.
Nice.
It's like, oh,
so fetch response is going to have a status and a headers.
Status headers body.
and a text. And text is going to return a promise. So I think what I'd like to do, I'd like to add an interface for our response. And we'll call this...
Is this the stubbed response? Or
This is going to be the nullable response.
the nullable response, okay.
Because I can't use the word response, which is what I'd like to use,
Right.
because
it's already...
that's the real response. So our response is going to have a status, which is number, I think. Headers, which is... Let me see if I can pull up the actual typing on this.
You go into response. Okay. So headers is headers.
Headers is headers.
And status is a number, yeah.
And then text.
So body is text. So body is... Remember, body is that streamable, readable thingy.
No, it's just a promise.
Oh, text. Oh, it's, yeah, right.
Yeah, because it's a method.
Yeah, text itself is a string. Yeah.
Right.
I was thinking of body itself.
Yeah, body is what we're returning.
Right.
But text is what we're calling on fetch.
Right.
So...
I have to get used to that syntax where it looks like it's a property, but it's actually a function that happens to have that name.
Which one?
This one here, it looks weird. It just looks weird to me because I'm not
the
used
way
to
that you use the arrow function there.
It's more that this doesn't have the parens like sort of right on it, so it looks weird. That's all.
Actually, this is also legal.
Yeah, I don't know if that's idiomatic, but that's way easier to read.
I think this is idiomatic. I
Okay.
think what I was doing was more idiomatic than idiomatic.
All right.
Okay, so let me put this back to this.fetch now that we've looked that up.
Yeah, SweetJS, is there a difference between property and function? It's like everything's just pointers, so I don't know.
Yeah.
Just pointers.
So in JavaScript, if you're declaring an object, you can say, my method is a function.
Right.
Or you can say it's a function.
Right.
Or in more recent versions of JavaScript, you can say it's a function.
Right.
These are all just different.
So many ways to do the same thing. Yeah.
And then TypeScript, of course, this interface is a TypeScript thing, and it just tries to imitate JavaScript.
Yeah.
Okay, so stubbed fetch is going to return a promise of a nullable response, which means we should say promise resolve status of 501, 503, and headers of nothing, and a text of something. I'm trying to figure out why this is complaining at me. What's it complaining about? No overload matches this call.
Is it complaining about headers? Because it looked like it was something about headers.
Oh, it doesn't like headers.
because it has to implement those methods.
Yeah. So I think we'll just say that the headers is a string of string. We'll see what happens with that.
Yeah, now it's more happy. I don't think it needs that, does it?
I'm not entirely sure. No, it probably doesn't need it. I think it's probably able to infer it.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, that it could infer.
Sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't.
Of course.
Yeah, but it's more of an issue when you're doing new promise, which happens from time to time.
So now we actually need to return a string.
And then just when you're making, when you're nulling out something that's asynchronous, it's always a good idea to actually make it asynchronous. Otherwise, you can get some subtle differences in behavior. So we're going to return wait, new promise. Okay. Once again, TypeScript is unhappy. We're going to return the promise rather than returning awaiting it.
Well, that's straightforward.
Yeah, what this is doing is saying set immediate is kind of confusing. What that's actually saying is on the next pass through the event loop, do this right away. It's like saying timeout with
zero. Yeah.
And in fact, it's effectively the same thing as doing with zero. And in fact, this does need to be a site timeout because set immediate doesn't exist on the front end.
Oh.
Yeah, that's a nodism. Okay, and then line 61, we're missing a semicolon.
And right, headers.entries is not a function because somewhere we're looping through it. The headers.
Right.
To convert it. Yeah, right there on 34.
Yeah. So this actually needs to be a stubbed headers. With an entries.
So 46 has to match?
Yes.
So you call them stubbed headers?
Yes.
So nullable headers is going to be the one that we'll implement for the fetch as well.
Yeah, actually, you know what? I think I probably can do stubbed headers here. Yeah, I don't know. Honestly, trying to handle the types and the coding on this at the same time is making life difficult. So let's see where this takes us. But I'm going to make the interface nullable headers here, which is going to be entries, which is going to return. Where's entries return?
Can you click on entries and look at the type?
Yeah, it's a tuple. It's it's an array of key value pairs.
Can't be it.
This is not getting us anything useful. Entries method returns an iterator.
Oh, it's an iterator.
Oh
Right.
boy.
That makes sense because it's basically a map-like structure underneath. So it's going to iterate through the key value pairs.
I wonder if we could use headers directly. Can we just make a headers?
We can, and then we just append or set. So we can just append.
Yeah,
a new
let's
value,
do that.
key value.
Let's just try to make. Sometimes I find it frustrating to go into these low-level details, and it's better to stub them. But and other times, sometimes you're better off just making the real thing. So let's do it. Yeah, we can just say new headers for now, and then we don't need to worry about the nullable headers,
right?
Or the stubbed headers,
right? And then under nullable response, then that goes back to being headers.
Yeah, we might be able to actually use a regular response as well, rather than a nullable response. Let's take a look at that.
Right, because it'll depend on how easy it is to just create and get it to what we want. Oh, we can create it.
We can create it.
Setting the body is probably going to be the tricky part.
Yeah. Nope, you just pass in the body.
And it takes a string. Well, then that's straightforward.
Yeah, so in that case, let's try doing that. So our response is going to equal a new response with the body. And the options. See what those options are. Status and headers. Oh, that's easy. That's super easy.
That's even easier than writing our own.
It's rare. Now what we're going to want to do is we are going to want to set immediate on this. And
set immediate or set timeout?
Sorry, what?
So set immediate or set timeout?
Set timeout.
Okay.
The fact that we're running our tests in Node rather than the browser does put us at a fair amount of risk for these sorts of things.
Is there a way we can put this in somewhere up the integration chain where it would run it, even though it would be slower, we'd only run it before integration or something like that?
I think we should wait until it bites us, to be honest.
Okay.
Because
I wasn't saying doing now, I'm just saying that's probably what we would look at doing.
It's possible to run this in the real browser for not very much cost in terms of our feedback loops. So I think it's not so much we would do this up the integration chain It's just we'd either do all of our front end code in the browser or not.
Okay.
The problem is the tool I'm used to using, Karma, has been end of life, and so I haven't figured out what the latest and greatest replacement is.
Okay.
Yeah, and I don't want to.
I hear you. I hear that.
I quite enjoyed JavaScript, the language. I still hate working in front end browsers. So now what I'm doing is I created the response.
Do you want to change this?
And, oh yeah, thank you. You want to fix that? Yeah. I've created the response, and then I've returned a promise that resolves that to that response on a future iteration of the event loop.
Right.
So that we imitate the real behavior of something going out and working asynchronously. And this might work.
Well, hey. Is it running the tests we expect?
Yeah, the test passed. And the type check passed.
Okay.
So I kind of want to CMJ, I don't think we can simplify that to promise.resolve response because that's not asynchronous. And the main thing we want here is we want it to be asynchronous. So it's that set timeout that's the issue. I think we've finished this test, that it doesn't make HTTP requests.
Right, yes, yep. Yes, I agree with that.
Charlie, Cypress is really popular, but it's more your classic end-to-end integration testing rather than programmatic unit style testing, I believe, but I have not looked into it in depth.
Yeah, I've heard of Cypress and I've heard of Playwright. I have not. I have nothing connected in my head to what those actually do for you.
I need to do some more research.
Yeah.
I remember looking into Playwright when I was first setting up this build, and it definitely wasn't right. You look at a lot of these front-end testing tools, and they're very clearly designed for QA departments and sort of a low-code, no-code style.
Yeah.
But if their marketing webpage shows you, say stuff like no coding necessary, or
then you're
just click, or record playback.
Right.
Still, 30 years later is still all the rage, and it still has all the problems that record playback has always had.
Yeah.
The main advantage to it is it's really easy to create a test, but as always, the costs are in maintenance, not in creation.
Right.
So, yeah. I liked Karma because it was a programmer's tool, not a GUI tool.
Yep.
So we've added HttpClient.create null, right?
Yes, we have.
So now what we need to do is we need it to track requests.
Right.
And this is not a nulled instance thing.
Right, because we want to track requests regardless.
I think for this, I'm going to go ahead and pull in my sort of, except we're on the client. We're in the browser, so we can't use node events. So I can't use my standard request tracker where I have to build something.
That sucks.
Yeah, it does suck. Okay, so let's go back to our README. Set this aside for a moment. We are kind of still working.
Yeah, if we count the output tracker, then we're still working on that.
I think we need to make an output tracker.
So can we partially reuse the code, or is it just a totally different animal?
I think it's a totally different animal.
Okay.
We use these little diamonds to mean
in progress.
In progress, yeah. or on hold.
Yeah. Basically put it on our stack.
We might be able to use the tests for the output tracker.
Ah. Yes, that would be nice. That would.
Yeah. Let me go ahead and pull that up. Oh, that would be in a completely different tool. So code is not hard to write. It's very small.
Yeah, it's not a lot. The tests are actually, more valuable.
Yeah, I think they are. I'm just going to go grab the whole thing and see what happens. So I suppose we'd want this in our infrastructure package again, and we'll call it OutputListener test.js. And this is using a different
assert
testing library.
Yeah.
Same asserts, actually.
Oh, okay.
Because in JavaScript, a lot of the JavaScript tools separate the testing framework from the assertion library.
Yeah.
Which is handy. But WTF follows the same convention as Mocha, so it's not actually hard to bring it over. Let's see what we got here. Track submitted event supports arbitrary data types, can be stopped, can be cleared. I think I'll just comment all this out, and then we can go through it one at a time.
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll need an output listener. By the way, if at any point you want to drive, just let me know.
Yep.
Champing at the bit there, huh? Okay, so we'll need an output listener. That's good enough, right?
We need a create method.
And we need a track.
And a track output.
See if I can make this. Oh, I need to I need to export it. That's why it's not giving me anything.
Okay.
Go. Now, I would expect that if I were to run this, it would fail saying that track output doesn't exist. It actually, no. The tests were skipped.
2 skipped.
Yeah. Let me turn off the type checker.
Were they skipped because they didn't lint?
Nope.
Why would they be skipped?
Because we're not exporting.
Oh.
Tests.
Are there skip tests elsewhere?
We've probably got a dot only somewhere.
I meant to mention that I thought we'd added somewhere. Oh, there it is. There's a skip.
Yeah, that one's intentional.
Right. Did we have a dot only though?
Let me look in our front end code for dot only. Nope.
No.
I think it's something dumb in that I'm not setting up properly in our tests here. Let's see if this is even running. No, I got it. It's the file name.
Oh.
Test runner only runs things that end in .test.ts or .test.js, but
There we go.
there we go. Okay, now I expect it to fail saying that track output doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah.
So track output returns or will return a
tracker.
A tracker, yeah.
Might as well go ahead and create.
Mm-hmm. Right now, emit is there.
Yeah.
So I can drive from here. This stuff I think
Sure,
I can drive. So create that method.
That
So
my output should be an any.
So what are we going to call this? Is this an event message? What are we calling this?
I think I've been using data elsewhere.
Data? Okay. And we said this is any because we actually don't know what it is.
But it literally can be anything.
Right.
Let's not implement it yet. Let's just get the.
Okay. So tracker needs data. Do we want to create that next?
Yeah, let's do that. Except that shouldn't be a field. It should be an accessor. Do you need me to show you how that's done?
You can tell me how that's done.
Yeah, so in output tracker, you're going to add get data parenthesis, and then write it as a method. So squiggly braces.
Like that?
And no semicolon.
Oh.
I don't know why that's complaining.
Saying it needs to return something.
Oh. Yeah, so let's make the type array of any.
So is that any array like that?
Yep. And return an empty array for now.
Okay.
That should probably be on multiple lines.
Yeah. So.
We have to be, but that's how.
Yep. Okay. Well, that's what we expected.
Yeah. So to implement this, I think our output listener needs to keep an array of all trackers.
Was that private? And then do you do underscore for track?
Yeah, let's be consistent. And then you can default that to an empty array.
you want to put the type or?
Yeah, type should be an array of output trackers.
Okay. And so when we want to add that here when we create it?
Yeah, I think so.
So is it push?
Push.
Output tracker. So
And on line 10, if you wouldn't mind making that const.
Oh. Yep. Okay, and then
so emit should just loop through our output trackers and something with them.
So
syntax here is going to be parenthesis tracker, an arrow, and curly braces.
That's tracker data push.
Yeah, I think so it's not going to be data because that's an accessor.
Oh,
technically that would work, but we could write directly into the private data. It doesn't bother me that much since it's all in the same file. Or we could
do we want to be consistent with? Does it matter to be consistent with the other one you've written?
No, I don't think so. The other one uses nodes events. So
oh, right. Okay.
Different.
Okay. So can we say? I guess we can say data, but that's the accessor. I don't know what the.
We could because it's just returning an array reference or technically an object reference. But if we ever modify the accessor to do something different, that feels like could be an area of confusion. Let's just put it as underscore data for now, and we might want to improve that. But
okay.
Or no, let's just say tracker dot push.
Yeah, I was thinking adding a, and so here we're going to push data, right?
And then what we can do is we can make that protected.
And what doesn't it like about it? Oh, it's saying that if it's protected, it can't be.
Let's just do tracker.data.push.
Okay. So like that. So that'll still fail.
You're missing a semicolon on line 18.
Oh. Output tracker was used before it was defined.
I did not think that mattered, but go ahead and move it above the output listener. Which will still fail.
Right, because we're not actually returning it, what was pushed.
Right.
So let's go ahead and
so you just need to make a private data array. Default that to an empty array.
Right. So then this returns data. This dot data. Thank you, IntelliJ. So let's see. So we've got our private data. That's what we're returning. Here we're pushing it. So it should work. Yeah.
It did. Yeah.
All right. Look at that.
Okay. Template. I want to add templating. Output listener. But let's go ahead and do the next.
So supports arbitrary data types. Well, that should just work. Although we don't have the stop, so that'll have, well, but for
And
this
I actually
one,
don't think we want to do that. I think we're going to template this one.
okay.
So it will need to be the same data type every time.
What do you mean by template?
I mean, instead of taking the any data type, we'll do a templated data type.
Oh, okay.
But actually, no, I think this is okay. That should still work. Yep. And now we need to do the next one.
Now we need to make it stop. So tracker stop. So what does that do? That stops the tracking. For any listener, for all listeners?
So that was something that made more sense in the context of node events. It's something that I've never actually used. So let's just not implement that.
Yeah. I'm in favor of not implementing stuff we don't need.
Yeah.
So I'll take that out. We do care about clearing, though.
That actually becomes really useful.
So let's create that. No, that was weird. So clear.
We'll just reset the data.
Okay.
We needed this.
Yes.
Okay, save that. Let's see if our tests work.
Is clear supposed to return something?
It's supposed to return the data.
Oh, before it clears up? Okay. Return.
Well, you can't, nothing after return is going to.
Oh.
So what you're going to want to do is copy the data. And the way you do that is and declare a variable equal to square bracket space ... this data.
Oh, okay. So the spread operator or rest operator, I forget what they call it. And then return data copy. Oops. And we want this to be, whoops. Okay.
It may be Suiji, but either way, it's going to be good enough. And even if it is, then the compiler is certainly smart enough to figure that out.
Yeah, it's funny. I generally don't like to do those kinds of
tricks
because, like in Java, it used to be way back in time. You'd assign stuff to null, so the garbage collector would be more aggressive in some way, and that's just like, no, just let the compiler and runtime catch up to what it is. Yeah. Hey, I sub to small channels. Thank you so much for your Prime Gaming sub. I very much appreciate that.
Vruslik. If there's nesting, it's not really an issue because the references will be copied, not the deep reference. And our this.data equals square bracket isn't clearing those deep references either, so should be just fine.
Yeah, so it's basically a shallow copy, right?
Yeah. It is a shallow copy.
Yeah. Hey, look,
I think that's it.
we got our tests. That was having the tests. So I just want to comment, like, that was really nice. Like, oh, let's just implement based on these tests.
Yeah.
And that was relatively straightforward. Even I could do it.
Yeah. Beat me to it, Ted. So I'd like to put the typing or the templating on this. Mm-hmm. Do you want to continue driving?
Sure.
Okay. So what we're going to want to do is declare the output listener to be of type T. And then the output tracker will be of type T.
Right.
And the innies will become type Ts. And then down on line 17, that will become type T.
Output tracker of type T?
Yeah.
It's like that.
And I believe we'll want a type T on line 20.
Yes.
I mean, you get the idea. Anywhere we have an any or an output tracker or an output listener, we want it to be type T.
There are no more any's. Okay.
I think we might need to, start specifying our return values on these.
Oops.
What is that complaining about?
Static members cannot reference class type parameters.
Oh, I'm not seeing. Where are you?
So down here in the status bar, it shows the error message. Oh. Do we need it? Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
See, in Java, you'd put the T somewhere over here as well, but
right.
Okay. Look at that.
Let me do one more thing here.
Oh, yeah, that returns stuff. Yep.
And let me also do a build type check here. Okay.
Do we want to test to like, so arbitrary data types, do we want this test to change?
Nope, I don't think so.
Okay. Or do we want an additional test that if you, I guess we have the templating and we just rely on that. Don't need tests for it.
The TypeScript is being smart here.
Yes. Is it like creating a union type underneath or something?
I don't know exactly how it's working. Like, I would expect it to complain that this was the wrong type.
Well, actually, it probably, if you don't specify T, it probably uses just any.
It probably does, yeah.
Because in a sense, that's what Java does, is if you don't specify it, it's object.
Yeah.
So if we did create listener and specify the type, then it would probably complain?
Yeah, try it.
So
actually do it on, do it there where it's a little easier.
So number, I don't know, can we do that?
Yeah, in fact, I think that is, you're seeing it complain right there.
Yeah. Well, here it's complaining expected 0 type arguments. Because it's not create lists. Oh, it's right, because we didn't type that. We probably should do that.
I think I'm happy.
Okay.
Hey, check this in?
Yeah.
Let me update our README.
Yes. deep equal uses any. I assume deep equal uses any.
I think deep equal doesn't use anything.
Doesn't use anything. So yeah. So then underneath it's just JavaScript. Yeah.
So we've create output listener.
So do you call it an output listener or an output tracker? Which is because output listener uses the output tracker. Yeah.
Yeah. The output listener is what we're going to have in our production code, and the output tracker is what we're going to use in our test code.
Okay.
Should we take our next break?
Yeah, it's perfect timing for that.
All right.
All right. We will be back after this short break.
Okay, so we've just finished making our output tracker. We're back here on making the HttpClient nullable. And I think, did we have a test skipped in here somewhere?
I know we had a test skipped somewhere. I don't know if it was in here or was...
We were going to write it tracks requests here.
Right.
Did we stash that? I thought we started to write that.
I don't think we wrote it, or I don't think it was stashed.
No, we didn't stash it. I'm going to drop this stash actually because I think this is old. Yeah. So do you want me to write that, or do you want to write it?
Let's see. So what are we going to write? We're going to write that we can track the requests.
Yeah. Yeah.
So why don't you write the test, and I'll see if I can write the code.
Okay. So it tracks requests.
So Ruslik asks about difference between an output tracker and a spy. Output tracker is a form of spy.
Sort of like a spy.
Yeah, I would say it's an implementation of
production code.
Right. Right. So unlike the typical mocking spies where you're substituting things at test time, this output tracker will exist in the production code
and can be used regardless. It's sort of like a spy, but it's really quite different. It fulfills the same purpose. Right. In my training course, which is currently ongoing, actually the 3rd out of 4 sessions is happening tomorrow morning. Somebody said they had a great way of phrasing it. Output tracker is for tracking side effects, stuff that you otherwise can't see.
Right.
And unlike a spy, which says, was this method called? The output tracker says, keep track of which side effects occurred. So when we're tracking the requests, we're saying which requests were sent out.
Right.
Which HTTP requests were sent out.
Yeah.
So, and this is about the request. So I'm going to go ahead and copy the makes HTTP request code and then modify it. So we're going to make an HTTP request with path, post, headers, body, all that's fine. But we're going to need to return the in request async call here. What we're going to do is before we make that request, we're going to say tracker client dot track
requests. Right.
I think we already have. Call that request, not tracker. Then back up here, we'll get those requests. And then we'll assert those requests are exactly. Oops, I'm in the wrong spot. Here, get those requests. I'll assert that the requests are, we get exactly one request of the exact same shape. Path of my path, method of post, and we need to normalize the method.
Yeah, I was going to say I guess the default server is to make it uppercase because that's what the HTTP protocol generally expects.
Yeah, so I'm just going to make a note that it normalizes tracked requests, methods.
Yeah, so the tracker is interesting because it's not replacing a dependency. It is basically tracking events, and it's almost like you're logging everything and you're looking at the log.
You want this to be uppercase or lowercase? We need to choose one. I typically do lowercase, but for no good reason.
I always think about it as uppercase, but I don't have a good reason either.
Let's go with uppercase.
Okay.
I think you're not the only one who feels that way. Then we're not going to care about the default fetch request header to the content link. That's not really relevant to us.
Right.
If I save this, we should get. It should say. I think it will. This has to be async.
Right.
I think it's going to tell us that we got nothing in our array, but it might complain that request.data is not a thing. It may be undefined. Yeah, it's undefined. Do you want to implement that?
Requests. I'm actually a little lost. Why is request data? Oh, wait, so request comes from our request async.
Mm-hmm. And it's just the result of the calling client.track request.
Oh, so we don't have so this is this request dot I thought this. Sorry, I'm confused because aren't we expecting two response and requests?
So this is a bit of a tricky thing. Let me show what's going on here.
Yeah.
This is one of the things I really like about JavaScript, but it's weird. What we're doing here is we're saying return an object literal.
Right.
With the name response equal to the variable response, and the name request equal to the variable response. And then up here, we're saying get that object literal and destructure it. And the only part, which in destructuring means for every name that we list, turn that into a variable.
Yeah, I got that. And we
only care about the one variable. We don't care about the response.
Right. So I guess I was confused why this is requests, not. This is requests. Okay. We lost response, so we don't care about the response anymore. That's where I was lost.
We only care about the request we're tracking.
Because they both start with the RE. I was getting confused.
You thought it was response.
I thought it was response. Like, why are we getting data from response? Now I got it.
That makes sense.
So requests, it's saying request data is undefined.
Yeah, and so if I can just point you in the right direction here. Right now we're calling track requests, and we're just returning a stub.
Okay.
This should be returning an output tracker.
And what kind of events?
Type something.
What are our events? Is it? Do we need to make that?
We get the core thing working, because that's going to be a little bit tricky.
Okay. So
we need to make an output listener.
Right. And I'm trying to figure out what level we make that.
I think as a private variable on the HttpClient.
Okay. So this would be, and this is our output tracker.
No, not a tracker, a listener.
Right. And listener. Sure.
Let's leave that at any for now.
And then we're saying that when we do track requests, we want So I forget what do we call? We call
it's so you're going to call this dot. So return this dot output listeners. Output listener dot track output.
right. So actually, we need to instantiate the output tracker here.
Oh, did we not do that?
I did not do that. Output listener any. Right.
If you instantiate it, you don't need to provide the type. It's enough to figure that out. No, that type we should provide.
The other way around.
It's this type we don't need to provide. Yeah. Whole thing.
Right. And that looks okay.
Okay, so now we're getting nothing back because nothing's been emitted.
Right. So now we want to emit in our request. So what do we want to emit? What did we say we're comparing that against?
Basically the URL method headers and body.
Okay.
So pretty much exactly what we get in, we want to emit back out.
Okay. So
and I always emit before I make the request, not after.
So this dot output listener emit, and we're saying
Just say URL method headers and body.
URL method headers. Oh yeah, okay. So that's just those. And so do you put this on one line since there's no type?
I agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And Sweegie, the sounds are still playing, but because the video conferencing tool we're using doesn't allow me to send sound through the computer, you're just getting it out of my computer through the microphone. So sometimes you'll hear it and sometimes you won't.
Yeah, like I just heard it, but if it's not super, super quiet, you won't hear it. Yeah.
Okay, so that should have worked. Why did it not work?
Oh, the URL. Right.
Oh, right.
So that what's the right answer? Because fetch is the one that
I think we actually want the URL, not just a path. Why does it? Where's the URL? Okay, so that's something we're doing inside.
Oh, right. I was thinking we were doing that in the production code.
Yeah, I don't know that that's a good abstraction. Like having request async change it from path to URL. That's not great.
I mean, it was convenient, but maybe it's not right.
Yeah. But in the meantime, let's go ahead and fix that. There we go.
Yep.
I think that's it. Do you mind if I put in the types? It's going to be a little bit tricky.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. I think I'm going to check in.
Okay.
Because it is going to be a little bit tricky. We've added the HttpClient.track requests. I think I want to call this request listener. Listener. I think I want to move this up here because these two go tightly together.
Yep. So you're just going to extract
by the way, this
an interface for those four? Is that what you're
think, yeah, we're going to want to make an interface for it.
Yeah.
By the way, this sort of fiddling around like, oh, I want this here, I want that there. That's often what I'll do when I'm starting to work on a hard problem. I'll kind of like nibble away at the edges of it until
your background,
my brain is like properly on target.
Yeah. It's sort of like, getting your hands on the clay and it's like getting sort of re-engaged with it. Yeah.
Exactly. Okay, so what we want to do here is we want to extract interface.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to call that, I don't know what this just did.
Request event, but why did it do that there?
What in
Can
the
you do
world?
that? Oh, that's interesting. It's now typing it. Can it do that? Is that? I mean, I guess I could do that. That's weird.
TypeScript is an immensely complicated typing system, and there are all these edges to it that I'm not actually familiar with. So, yeah, I'm sure that's legal.
That's a cast. That's a very strange cast.
What's a cast? Yeah, I always use as such and such when I cast. So new output listener, what are we going to call this? It's not created. It's the
request event.
Let me see what I do in my other code. I've done typing on this thing before. If we open up output listener. Oh, it looks like we got the typing right. There. And then let me take a look at HttpClient. HttpClient output is what I call it.
Mm-hmm.
So, and the reason we want to do that is because we actually want to export it.
Right.
We're going to, the people who use it are going to care. Is that it? I thought it was going to be tricky, but I think that might actually be it for the types. Am I missing something?
Well, we defined the request listener. The only other thing we use from it is the emit, and that we're not casting it. It just assumes that it's
it just works.
It just works. It's the right shape.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Yep. Well, here's where we're missing. This is what we're missing.
Okay.
This is going to be an output tracker
of HttpClient output. Yep.
And that's okay. This is what I was expecting to be tricky. It's not that tricky. We're just not exporting it.
Well, that's tricky enough for me. Output tracker is not defined.
Oh, we just need to import it. And then I still wonder, can I put this? Linter doesn't like it, but does the Typechecker dislike it? What? Yeah, the linter is just being annoying.
So is that just like a linter configuration, like put definitions before?
It's excessively strict linting. Let me take 2 minutes to figure this out.
Yeah, go ahead.
Check it in, but yes, lint.
Yeah, so Suiji, I'm like our memories are limited. There's only so much we can easily retrieve, and if the less we use it, right, because you don't write this stuff all the time, the more you have to. Like this is why I have a book that's half written of just snippets of things that I use occasionally, like how to do checkboxes with time leaf, and because I do it like once and then I don't do it again for like 3 months, so constantly looking at and referencing my own blogs and things like that is a common thing.
So it looks like I've got it specified here as okay, but let me just double check that. Okay. Oh, you must disable the base rule.
Oh.
Yeah. Oh, it's still being obnoxious.
So ignore mean off? Is that the...
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know why it's having an issue with this.
Can you put it as a comment to see if that ignores it for that one instance?
I could, but I think I'm going to put this as a task for me to look at offline. So,
is there something we need to restart?
I'm sorry?
Sweetie asks if there's something we need to restart to get to recognize the config change.
Nope, it shouldn't.
Okay.
But I'll try it. It's supposed to recognize changes and restart automatically.
Oh, okay.
And detect it. I save it. We should see it. Yeah, it's restarting when I make changes to the config files. But yeah, let's not let this.
Yeah. We've exceeded our time limit for this, so
yeah, I said 2 minutes, and I think we're well past that.
Yeah.
Output tracker. Let me just make a note.
Yep. Yeah, by the way, Ruslik, if you go back to our very earlier episodes where we first introduced the output tracker, and if you can't find which episode that is, you can go to the Nullables page, or you can hit me up in Discord, and I can point you to it. When we first did it on stream, we talk a lot about and explore a lot about why we're doing it and what the purpose is.
I think at this point, what we've done is we've added some of the types we need. But I think we still have a couple of innies in here.
Right, for the fetch, is that the only one?
Yeah, I think this one.
That's not bad.
Didn't we decide that it just needs to be type of fetch?
Yeah, we weren't sure about it when we were implementing the stub stuff, but now that we have that in place, then yeah.
All good.
So no more any's?
I don't think so. Nope, all good.
All right.
Okay, so we've added add type checking to HttpClient. Request async. I'm going to just say add missing type checking to HttpClient. I think we've done it once before, but then there is something that we're going to do that we forgot, which is that we've got this test here that we need to write. So I'm going to. Before I do that, I think we need to fix this path URL thing.
Oh, yeah. So what do we want to do?
I think. So where is it?
Right there. Here. Yeah. So we over-conveniently translated the path.
Yeah, I think this should be called prefix, URL prefix, maybe?
Something got messed up.
Oh, that did not work at all. Let's try that again. URL prefix. Put that up here. And then here, I think we need to do something along the lines of that. Do you agree?
What happens to our assert then on 49?
That's still correct.
Oh, right, because it's going to translate the...
But that's why we were passing in path before.
Right.
But I think we need to be more, like, we want to make the call that we're actually making.
Yeah, I agree. So our request async now needs to change.
Yeah. I'm going to have it take, for now, I'm just going to have it take both of these. No, I'm just going to do this. I was trying to think of a way to do it incrementally, but I think we've got so few tests, it's going to be more of a pain to do it incrementally than to just do it. This is going to probably fail for a couple of tests that don't have the URL in it.
Right.
Here's one of them.
Right.
Okay, now we should have just one test failing. We do.
Yep.
And there we go.
So 89, why is it complaining? Because we don't have path anymore.
Right. How is this even passing?
What were we asserting? This is just we were receiving the response. We didn't care about how it got sent out. That's why.
Oh, right. So I'll just take out that path entirely.
Yeah.
And do I care about the post? Apparently we do.
We care about the post. Do we care about the headers? Yeah.
Why do we care about
weird?
The post? Oh, it doesn't like options.
I remember I was putting that in there. That's good.
Let's let me find that again. So actually, we should just be able to say request async. Fetch is still failing. Yeah. Okay. We'll just do get. We'll just do post. All right. This is the way I code, folks. It's I make a really, really fast development loop, and then I try something, fail, try something, fail, try something, fail, try something, fail. Eventually, it works, and I'm happy.
Yep.
As long as I know why it's working.
Yes.
That's the important thing. Okay, so I think I'm just going to say that we've cleaned up HttpClient.
Right.
Test abstractions.
Yep.
All right, so coming back to here, finally, do this test.
I'm going to need an async there.
Did I miss something?
Yeah.
Oh, up here.
Yep.
Okay. We don't really care about the URL, but we need to have it.
Right.
This should have been URL prefix. And this should be URL prefix. And then
Yep. Do we care about the body?
We don't care about the body, but I think we just want to document here.
Got it. Yep.
I think that's it. Yeah, I heard that too, Suiji, but doesn't seem to be in the version of IntelliJ I'm using.
Oh.
All right. Do you want to implement this, or you want me to do it?
I can implement it. So what are we actually saying? We're saying
We just need to normalize the method. In
yeah,
headers.
I was just looking at how we're gonna know what we're expecting. So let's see. So
yeah, I definitely saw it in the announcement, Suiji, and I rejoiced because it's something that I
clearly do a
so
lot.
often.
Yeah. And I think we want to normalize it before we emit, correct?
Yes.
Uh,
And go ahead. Go ahead.
So method. Can we reassign? Is that okay?
Yeah, you can do that.
And I don't know, what is it? Is it 2 uppercase?
2 uppercase, 2 uppercase is fine.
Okay. And headers is going to be interesting. So headers we're normalizing by.
Headers is a bit tricky, and you might want to let me just type it in because I've got it in my muscle memory. Because
yeah, go ahead and do that one because that one's going to be trickier.
Yeah. So headers, what we're going to do is we're going to say object.fromEntries,
right?
Object.entries, map.
Yeah, it's that part that I'm not. I don't have at hand. The rest of it,
Yeah.
it's very, very much like the way Java does stream stuff.
Yeah. And why is this giving me a whole bunch of errors? Probably because I haven't
returned it.
And technically, we don't need the return. We could just do it this way. But I don't know that that's better. Oh, and object.entries needs to be headers like that.
Right. Oh, you didn't call it a method.
I think I would like to do that a little differently. Probably easier to show you than tell you. I think what I'd like to do is this and this. What do you think?
So that means, though, we're emitting not what we're sending.
That's true.
For the method. And actually,
That's true.
Suiji asked that, and it's like, I think we can, if we're deciding to normalize it, then we should not.
Yeah. I think there's slightly less chance of having obscure errors if we send what we say we're sending.
Yeah.
But I would like at least to then factor this out.
Yeah. I would totally factor that out.
To keep reformatting my.
Doesn't like the way you have it.
Oh, and I don't blame it. That's the way it should be.
should have just done that right off the bat.
And let's see this.
Oh, does this need to be inside there? Okay.
I think I'm going to make it a private function instead of a private method instead of a function. In JavaScript, I use a lot of functions as opposed to private methods. Private methods are a relatively new thing.
So is that what the hash is?
Yeah, that means private.
Okay.
TypeScript does have proper private variables,
right.
private methods, but I actually kind of like having seeing the distinction, a clear distinction between the private and not private. I think that's it. Are we done with HttpClient for now?
I think we are.
Okay, I'll check that in. Let me look at our README real quick. So I don't think we're entirely done making it testable. We're ready to come back to our front end.
So is underscore meaningful, or is it the hash that's actually meaningful?
Hash is meaningful, underscore is not.
Okay, so underscore is just idiomatic. Okay.
Yeah. But you can use hash for variables now as well.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So what did we do?
We normalized our method and headers. Casing. Yeah, I remember in Golang the case was mattered for how it was visible, and I don't know whether I liked it.
People praise, I've never used Go, but people really praise the Go formatter.
Yeah, I mean, that certainly took a whole bunch of things off the table. It's like, this is the way it is.
Yeah.
It's,
I mean, there's something to be said for having too many choices, particularly choices that don't really matter, like coding conventions, causing problems.
Yeah.
Python's similar in that, they've got their choices in terms of how white space works, and people get along with that just fine. Or I guess they don't use Python.
That's why I don't use Python. No, that's
really
the reason.
Meaningful white space.
No, there are other things about it that I don't. It's one of those where it's like I don't have enough need for it, so I didn't bother trying to get used to it.
I keep meaning to find a reason to use Python, but I haven't found a reason to use it yet. I know it's very popular.
Yeah, if I was doing more machine learning or things like that, then Python would probably be what I'd use.
It's funny because Python's a very slow language, but it's picked up or it's got a very slow runtime, but it's picked up so much steam in the numeric and data processing.
Yeah, data processing. Yeah.
Maybe not numeric. That's still Fortran, I think. But that wasn't a joke. I think Fortran is really big amongst certain fields. Anyway, I think we're done with HttpClient, and we can go back to our back end, which should be...
Oh, yeah. That's where we started.
Yeah. And now we should be able to run this test.
Right.
And now we have our HTTP request.data. So maybe this will just work.
Well, it
won't, because we're not actually doing it. But
yeah.
Maybe the test will work. It's working. Do you want to implement it?
So let's see. So yeah. Let's see. Will it create a field for me? Yes.
Yeah, well, I'm not a big fan of meaningful white space, but that's because I have too many scars from working with make.
So what are we going to request? What is our URL? Who knows what our URL is?
Oh yeah,
Presumably.
we say that we expect a path, but it's actually going to be URL here,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Is it? Who does BackEndClient know the URL, or does the caller?
Well, so this gets into some stuff that we have not even touched upon, which is
Right.
we need a configuration.
Right.
We need a configurator. Do we have that in our README?
It doesn't look that way unless it's further up. I don't think so.
Which one are we on? Send prompt from hardened communication.
Yeah, that's
Or just
backend.
to add configure. Actually, I'm just make backend URL configurable. And through the magic of procrastination, we now don't have to worry about it. So yeah, let's just hard code it to a number for now. I mean, that's obviously super low rent, but
Yeah. So actually, what I was thinking is like, where would we configure that? Would the backend client be configured, or would that be pushed further out to the caller?
it would be passed in to the backend client through the
Okay.
constructor,
Okay.
I think. Yeah.
So then,
But for now, I think we can just put it in a constant.
right. Right. Okay. So what we're going to request async is, right, so the 0 URL.
You're missing a few things here. You need this.
Right. Okay.
Then Command P is what I'm doing there. Then you've got your type.
Yeah, no, I just didn't. I'm not used to having object literals as parameters. So,
oh, right.
Because I did a Command P and I'm like, oh, okay, that's what I need. And I realized,
oh, okay. I didn't see that.
I didn't realize that I needed the curlies. So, do I need to say URL?
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Because it's just an object literal, so
right.
you do have to pass in the actual.
Okay.
Yes.
So this is just. That's just the constant. That's and method. And headers.
It's all literally the same thing.
Yeah, it's all literally the same thing. Yeah.
Body.
Headers. I know I could copy paste, but like, what is it like about headers? Oh.
Oh, that's not actually the right header, is it? It's content type application JSON.
Right. So how do so is this that? So content type like that. That's not a comma, it's a colon. Are we asserting the right headers then?
We're not.
Okay.
But that's okay.
And then the body. Glad I actually typed that from scratch.
Yeah.
And so what do we expect here? The body is, it is a string. Okay. So
you want to do JSON.stringify.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the message is going to be my message.
Okay, you need some semicolons.
Sure. Oops. There we go.
Yep. Okay. I think that's just complaining about Oh, you went up too high.
Oops. I'll let you
I think
scroll.
that's, what'd you say?
I'll let you scroll because it seems really fast scrolling on my end.
It is really fast. So we've got,
So that should be
normalize this a
post,
little
right? We
differently.
normalize that, and the headers are wrong. Yep. You just typed a comma the same way I did.
Yep. That should work, and it did.
Yay.
Do I like that on one line? I think I like it on multiple lines.
Lines is good. Yeah.
I really wish there was better, oops, not that one, better support for multi-lines. I'm going to rename this to message.
Because then we could take out the,
Shorthand.
Yep.
And then this, I think one line would be fine.
Yep. I'm good with that. I'm good with that.
And then this.
What are we returning? Right now we're not returning anything.
Yeah, but I want to fix the type anyway.
Oh, okay.
There we go.
All right.
Let me run a type check on that, but I think we are good. Yep. Okay. So now we have, backend client say sends request.
Sends request. Yeah.
Doesn't.
Oh, do we? Sweetie asks, do we want to await the async?
We should await the async. It shouldn't actually be working.
Our test does not say await. Does not say async though.
Yeah, I mean, we absolutely want to await it, but our test shouldn't work. So
is it because we didn't do an async here?
I mean, no, what I'm saying is that.
Oh, because that request async is.
Yeah. Oh, you know why it's working is because we're emitting synchronously.
Oh.
We're emitting the event synchronously.
Do we want that?
We would have caught this when we did the parsing the response, because the response parsing won't work unless it's
actually executed. Yeah.
Unless it's actually awaiting. So I think we're okay. But yeah, that's got
to be a promise, right? Yep.
That's a good catch, Suiji. Thanks. So I think that was just an error. And actually, I want to use my naming convention here. Say async. That will help. It didn't help that much, but it should help.
Well, I was implementing it, and I'm not used to it, so you can blame me.
Yeah, but I should have caught it since I'm navigating. All right. So I think what we have to do next is this.
Right, the parse response.
Parse response. And I'm going to go ahead and just put that in here as a to-do. But I think we should probably stop here given the time.
This is a perfect time to stop.
Normally I wouldn't check that in, but we've got to post this up onto the server.
Yeah.
Do that. Okay.
All right.
Yeah. Thoughts? Final thoughts?
So just a reminder, folks, we're skipping next week because I'm going to be getting ready for the Kansas City Developer Conference, but we'll pick it up in 2 weeks from here. I have to say the thing that stood out for me was actually reusing those tests to implement a completely different version of the output tracker. That was really nice.
Yeah, it made it so easy to implement.
Yeah.
I mean, the output listener is not super complicated, but there's enough going on and having the test on there. Like we just powered on through that.
Yeah.
Other than that, I'm pleased at how quickly things went.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that the nullables, making HttpClient nullable was much easier than I feared it would be, and being able to use the
Being
response.
able to use the response was the key. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And this, I think, shows the importance of good API design as a library creator.
Yes.
You particularly see this in Java and C#. I've definitely seen it in C#, and I think you see it in, we've sort of experienced it with Swing, or not Swing, Spring.
Swing too,
where you're getting down into the low-level details, and they're so busy trying to make sure you can't use it improperly, they've made it so you can't really use it at all.
Mm-hmm.
It's all just implementation details. They're exposed as classes, but they're implementation details.
Right, right.
So I love that, the designers of this API took the time to say, well, yeah, you're not normally going to want to create this, but if you do, boom, here you go, no problem.
Right.
Just put the stuff in, and it works really well.
Yeah.
Even to the point of, like in C#, and I think Spring and Java as well, they'd be like, well, this has to be a streamable body, and creating that is a whole nother set of stuff. And
that's actually the
headers.
Yeah, that's actually the problem. You can create the thing, but to create the stuff inside the thing, you can do it, but it is not at all straightforward. And you have, like I've experienced that with Spring, where you have to then say, okay, what does the framework do? And you call this builder thing with this other thing and this other thing, and I'm like, okay, I can do that, but
it's very much a hammer factory,
yeah,
type of thing.
It's clearly not designed with because and I can totally see that point of view of like, why would you want to do that? It's like, well, if I want
to, and that sort of paternalistic mindset is really common amongst a lot of people. You see it on Stack Overflow. Can't answer the question. We have to ask you, well, why would you ever want to do that? And to be fair, sometimes people are asking questions because they don't understand the system. But I mean, it seems pretty obvious to me that the real implementation of fetch is not going to be creating this with a string.
Right.
They're going to be passing in some sort of stream of bytes, and the headers are going to be some other low-level thing.
Right.
So that they took the time to make a pleasant developer experience for the people who aren't implementing a low-level implementation.
Right.
I really like that.
Yeah.
And I didn't expect it. Like, as you saw, going down that rabbit hole of, well, we need to make this this interface and that interface. I'm so used to being beat over the head with, you can't touch that.
Yeah.
That it was a real pleasant surprise.
Yeah. So one thing I haven't looked into is, so Java, a few versions back, implemented a new HTTP API. I honestly have not looked at it because using Spring, you're not exposed to those lower level things, and I'd be interesting to look at it and see how amenable it is to this kind of approach.
One thing that I find is that when I'm using frameworks and they're abstracting away the low level, like Java API, often they were created because originally the low level API was not
terrible.
Great.
Yeah.
But time has passed,
mm-hmm.
and now it's not actually that bad.
Right.
And sometimes, skipping right on past the framework's nonsense over abstraction and going back to the real thing can be a real benefit.
Yeah. Because
those abstractions leak, or in the case of Spring, can be a little bit overwrought.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, and it's there was so somebody published a what did he call it? I'll have to look up what the name was. Basically a sort of, I don't know if you'd call it a mini framework, but basically like, here's just how I would do stuff if I wasn't doing a framework and I was just creating a new thing, to more sort of glue code kind of thing than really a framework. And it's refreshing to see that, and it's one of those, there's so much momentum and maybe inertia, not knowing my physics, which is which, behind like so I actually got to ask the question from somebody who's a newbie. It's like, when should I learn Spring? I'm like, I'd like, because he wants to do a web app. I'm like, I hesitate to recommend Spring because it's so big and hides details from you.
Yeah.
On the other hand, you can get your questions answered. And so
it's the ecosystem on these things. Like
exactly.
the real benefit of these big frameworks isn't the code in the framework, which tends to be pretty mediocre. Because it's so big and complicated and so much hiding. When something goes wrong, what do you do? But the ecosystem around people are able to answer the questions, and all the plugins. Like the plugins are a big deal. And I wish people would. You don't have to write plugins for Spring. You could write just code that anybody could use.
Yes.
But everybody wants to write it as a plugin. Even simple things that don't need to be plugins, they write as plugins. To your point about the sort of what's the low level, and low level isn't the right term. What if you're just using the plain Jane,
out of the box SDK,
fundamental frame, the fundamental language library, which is pretty sophisticated in a lot of these systems. Like Java's been around a long time. It has a big standard library, with handling a lot of stuff. Same thing for C#, .NET, and Microsoft. That may be a little too much, but there's something like that. The similar kind of movement in JavaScript called Vanilla.js.
Yes,
the lightest weight framework you possibly get. Import Vanilla.js, 0 bytes, compressed 18 bytes. Advanced mode, you don't have to even import it. It's pretty funny. I think it's called vanilla.js or vanillajs.org or something like that.
And it's one of those, when Spring came out, it was a reaction to the complexities of its time, of J2EE or EJBs and all that kind of stuff.
Which were kind of a mess.
Which were terrible. So definitely, I don't know. It's a tough thing to like, well, okay, I don't want to use Spring. What do I use? And how much help am I going to get for that? And how alone am I going to be in the problems that I will eventually hit?
And how stubborn are you?
Yes.
I'm super stubborn, so I probably wouldn't use Spring. But there's also a nobody ever got fired for buying IBM type thing going on. You don't have to justify a decision to use Spring. Everybody uses Spring. I decided to use Spring. Nobody's going to get sued for that. But if you say, I'm choosing not to use Spring, and now everything that goes wrong is your fault. Something goes wrong with Spring, you might even spend up twice or even more as much time debugging the things that go wrong because of all the abstractions. But it's not your fault. You're just using the standard thing. I hate to say it, but using a framework like Spring is a safer choice from a careers perspective. And maybe from a promotion and getting hired at your next job. But I'm super stubborn, and that kind of reasoning drives me crazy. Because I want things to win based on merit. Right.
Yeah. Anything else?
No, this was fun. I think we made really good progress. Next time we have to parse the responses, and that will involve, I think, going back into HttpClient and implementing the support for the configurable. But that's pretty straightforward. So we're not that far off, I think, from having our backend client done. So I think after that, we might want to go back to our backend and
our actual backend.
And start implementing that endpoint.
That'll be cool. All right, folks, thanks for joining us, and as always, appreciate all the comments and questions and so on. And so, reminder: next week we won't be here, but in 2 weeks we will. So tune in then, and have a great rest of your day and week.
See you later, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Bye.